So, Dom, wild thing here. I was working on archiving a lot of my previous work, and I
Hmm.
found out from a friend of mine who's a library archivist that apparently digital files corrupt over time, which I did not realize.
I did not realize either. I
Yeah,
mean,
I know. I
honestly,
was
I
just
never
like,
thought about it.
my work, what? But then
Well,
I was just like, well, what if I uploaded it online? And she was like, yeah, that's not safe either.
well, it's funny because I mean, I'll be real. I always thought, I just never thought that you, if something, I always feel like if something's digital is on digital, that it lasts forever. And I understand there's the Internet Archive, but I really didn't know that that's what happens. So unless, of course, it's, it seems like a nude or some kind of.
Well, yes, no, because that's the thing that people always tell kids is the internet is forever, but maybe it's not. And these,
Embarrassing stuff, it will live forever. But
yes,
you
news
know,
and facts, that's expendable. Well, let's start the show on that note. Let's start. Hi, I'm Jenna.
and I'm Dom. You know what's funny? Not long ago, we were both breaking news. Now we're
Breaking unemployment records.
exactly just like thousands of other journalists who've been laid off from newsrooms across the country.
Yeah, and after the shock wore off, we kept asking ourselves, what the hell do we do now?
And over many, many cups of coffee,
And maybe a few drinks.
we realized we had a unique opportunity here. Why not pull back the curtain on what's really happening in American media?
Right? I mean, we've spent years in this industry seeing how stories get made or don't, and now we can actually talk about it.
And trust me, there's a lot to talk about. From local news disappearing to social media reshaping journalism, we'll break it all down.
And look, we're not here to lecture anybody. We just want to help make sense of the information that we're getting and maybe have some much needed fun along the way.
So, whether you're glued to the news, just trying to figure out what's real in your feed, or curious about the future of media, come hang with us.
Welcome to Laid Off and Looking, a podcast where two journalists
Are taking a critical look at American media.
So, speaking of lost information, Dom, and this is like
Mm.
incredibly serious and frankly frightening. I came across an article from NBC News recently that was saying so USAID, we are at this point, I feel like we're all familiar with the plight of that
Hmm.
organization in Washington.
Hmm.
Okay. So, employees were told to burn or shred classified documents, which is wild to me. Apparently, this Tuesday, so it would have been earlier this week. I don't know what date Tuesday, I don't know what date anything was, but anyway, earlier this week, excuse me, an email went out to staffers or the ones that are left in Washington that basically told them to burn or shred documents, um, basically to clear out all of their classified safes and personnel documents. And here's the important part: to shred as many documents first and then reserve burn bags for when the shredder becomes unavailable or needs a break. That is wild work.
I honestly cannot even believe what I'm hearing, to tell you the truth.
I like, okay, first of all, that sounds like something out of a villain movie. Like,
Yes.
doesn't that sound like the open scene for like,
Yes.
the layer of doom or something? But the other thing that got to me about, I mean, there's so many things that are wrong with this, but also is that, as a journalist, a lot of those documents would be the documents that people would, rely on or FOIA request or whatever, et cetera, for research for stories. So there's a whole lot of stories going forward that won't ever be able to be fully told and proved, more
Because, yeah.
importantly, because those documents are now gone. Like,
Hmm.
I just, oh my God, what's happening?
Well, it also gets into Jenna. I mean, we talked about this a bit last year too. If you're, and when you're talking about disappearing documents, how about, you know, we see a lot of news organizations that have been going under. Last year, I remember we talked a lot about when MTV News. Now, I know people could look at this and be like, "Well, it's MTV News." Well, you know what? But it's a
They had a
huge
huge
organization.
archive
It
of a lot of cultural stuff.
and June
A lot.
2024, they the MTV News site went offline. Now, there were some, we kind of touched on this a little bit, but in the past, but it was like a lot of that content ended up resurfacing on the Wayback Machine. Now, they just have not found all those articles, but it goes back to just like for journalists work, and you see more companies going under. Um, and what happens to that information that journalists have worked on? Number
Hmm.
one, for their own work, right? As journalists, like you have your work that you've put, and I know you've put the hard work you've put into articles that could just disappear. And also for people who are researching in time, just even, going back in history of what existed, for all that information to disappear is really shocking to know that that's going on. Um, and yeah, I don't know. I mean, to me, that's where I think we have, like, it's a conversation that a lot of people have avoided having because it's something that you don't want to think about. There's a lot of other shit going on. And so you're not
There's
really
a
think
lot of
there's a lot
other.
of, you have bags of paper being, you just burn it up.
Oh my
Uh,
God. Yeah, no, it's wild work, but that does bring us though to the conversation that we actually had. So I don't know, I'm sure you remember, Dom, that like last fall we had a conversation with Michael Alex,
Loved
who
Michael.
he was super awesome, former producer for MTV News about the groundbreaking work that they were doing in music and youth journalism. Again, was it hard news? Maybe not, but it was critical cultural news.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Anyway,
but I do want to say, remember, we talked about things like they talked about racism, abortion,
yeah,
homophobia. They really were
when
talking
nobody
about,
else really was.
right?
Yeah, and they, spoke to the younger generation in a way, well, that was us at the time. Ha ha ha.
Yes.
But they spoke to us in a way that was speaking to us and not over us or around
Mhm.
us or lecturing or anything else like that. So, I mean, incredibly important work. And, as we talked with Michael, our conversation continued because we pivoted to the archival loss of that work, like you just mentioned.
Mhm.
And Michael wasn't just a producer for The Week in Rock. He also founded and led MTV News's digital division from 1994 to 2007,
Mhm.
back when like that was a new thing to do, which I'm
I know.
sure that alone would have been like, I'm sorry, you want to what?
Yeah.
Which seems to be a legacy institution's reaction to like new ideas. I'm
Yeah,
sorry,
I
what?
remember. Yeah, yeah. He gets into it in the interview, but it's true. It's like it wasn't such an easy. It wasn't like, oh, sure, do it. I mean, nowadays it's much more. You have that reaction, but back then it was like, what are we spending money on?
Exactly, which actually brings a lot of questions to where journalism is right now. Like,
Mhm.
maybe we consider some different ideas, but I'm sorry, what? Anyway,
Exactly.
but we did take the time to ask Michael why he saw the value in digitizing the news. And here's what he said.
There's a persistent thought out there that you'll see in a million articles. MTV didn't have a digital strategy. We'll get to that. For us, it began in 1994. The company did a deal with America Online. America Online wanted content. MTV News and they're paying for it. MTV News provided the scripts of our daily news and Week in Rock shows that they put in a folder in the MTV area of America Online. Someone had to make sure that was getting done. I was supervising producer at the time, producing the daily news shows, producing the Week in Rock, supervising the segment producers. Getting the scripts to someone to put them in America Online was a task. Um, in the fall, it was boring until Woodstock 94 was announced. You had a long list of bands, a long list of rules. Lists on television didn't work. I'm producing a television show. This is going to be a terrible segment. I have an idea. We'll put these long lists in the folder on America Online, and we'll tell people on air, go to America Online, keyword MTV News for the full list of acts on both stage and for the rules on how to go camping. This was the original piece, or the first piece of MTV News original digital content. In the
Wow.
fall of 1994, I got my first digital employee to show me the World Wide Web. I'd never seen it. No one in the department had seen it. I searched on Yahoo under the words music news. There were three websites offering music news. They were not doing a bad job of in text reporting on small artists that, in fact, might be of interest to the MTV audience. I looked at this. It's electronic, it's on demand, it's cheap to make. And I immediately walked into my boss's office and said, we have something to worry about. And I'm going to be putting more time into this because we're going to have to become a digital first news organization because our competition is coming for us, The word disruption didn't exist yet, but in business, you get knocked off your perch, not by the competitor you expect, but by the place you don't expect. So we begin work on this. We build a website. Um, your question was, what did I see? It was there. It was easy. It was electronic. Young people are early adopters of technology. When I was, a teenager, the big joke was only the teens knew how to program a VCR, right? Our parents bought them, but they couldn't, they could just put a tape in and play. You couldn't record with them because that was just too much work. They couldn't set the clock. Okay. So I'm from the generation, no, I know how to work a VCR. But then I'm at MTV where all we do is think about what young people are going to do. You see the internet, and it's like, this is what they're going to do. This is where they're going to be. And there's actual music news competition in this microscopic at the time environment. It was obvious. I don't think it was like brain surgery or a great vision to see that. But then I was living music news. I loved new technology, and I was the guy there at the time. And I drove it. And a year later, we had a website. And in November of 1996, we started running news stories on the website before we had them on air, digital first news. And it grew and it grew and the world grew. And we all knew what happened in digital media in the 90s. It got big. I was the guy there. My boss was supportive of me pushing hard. We just had continued success. I could talk for an hour about MTV's digital. But I saw it. It was electronic. It was good. The competition was excellent, and you just knew your fans were going to be there.
And
Okay.
did the company like, were they part of, because I think,
Were they
we've seen
supportive?
company, yeah, were they supportive?
No, no.
Did they understand that? Because I think,
Well,
oh, they weren't.
so the way it worked, well, here's how the company was supportive. When you're MTV, everyone wants to do something with you. If you're selling something, how do you reach the kids?
Hmm.
How do you reach the kids? You reach the kids by MTV. So a lot of the new technology companies, America Online, Intel, Microsoft, to name three, at that time they all wanted to be content providers. We're going to be publishers. We're going to do something with this internet thing, which means they all come to MTV with money in exchange for something from MTV. MTV takes the money and then they turn to some creatives and say, you have to make something for this that we can give to them while we still have a lot of profit. So MTV News produced content 5 days a week. We were naturals for the business development people to reach out to. Of course, we loved the idea of having a new way to get the news out. So in exchange for funding, we were able to do things. Did MTV have a big picture goal? Not at the highest level. I mean, they liked the idea, but the money, I didn't want to say it's MTV. I would going to say Viacom. And I wasn't there. I wasn't in Judy McGrath's office. Judy McGrath, president of MTV, always had vision, always wanted to do the next thing. Evolve or die was her mantra. But Viacom was not offering the kind of money for us to spend that the startups with burn rates and angel investors were getting. So we had to make do with a lot of stuff. We had to, multi-purpose, but we did it. We were good at that anyway. MTV was always a place where there wasn't lots of money. There were lots of ideas.
Okay. So with all of that in mind, because I feel like there was a moment when all of this stuff where like MTV and more legacy media institutions and this new digital world all sort of convened. And to me, that was Metallica's suit against Napster, because I remember seeing that pop
Yeah.
up on like CNN and stuff like
Yeah.
that. And I was just like, yeah, I'm gonna go back and follow this on MTV. See how MTV News is covering it. But
Yeah.
still, like for that moment, it feels like all of those different worlds sort of convened in this one weird, but I guess understandable spot.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Napster, it changed the music industry. That, I mean, it never recovered. People paying for music, who does that? Uh, so there was that story and that experience. Metallica, with the last gasp of we think we own what we create and we want to be paid for that. Um, it was a crazy time. There we are at MTV. We are now. Here's where being pro music fan, and pro musician doesn't line up. Right? Musicians all of a sudden are giving their music away or having their music taken from them against their will and not being compensated. Music fans, free music, are you kidding? Are just taking it all in. We are pro music fan and we're pro musician. But being pro music, what do? We report on it all. That we reported on it all. That's what we were. That's where I think the divergence, was. A lot of great things came from that. A lot of, digital allowed many artists to break through and be discovered in a way that they never could before. But also the days of record labels being able to invest in artists changed significantly. I'm not really expert in that. I covered it, I lived through it. Someone else, could speak to that much more competently than I could. But yeah, that was like what year? Do you know what year that was?
99.
Yeah,
I think it
yeah.
was definitely the late 90s. I want to say 99. I don't think it was 2000. It could have started anyway, whatever.
So
It was
what, but
that
what's interesting
time.
about, let's say it was 1999, so MTV News is a television news organization. News organizations used to put their news out in a newspaper, in a magazine, on a television show, and their websites, I'm talking mid 90s, would carry that stuff afterwards because you don't want to deny your paying customers the first look at something. Um, and yet there's pure digital competition coming for music fans. We began digital first music news November 1996, wanted to get in front of that. The fall of 1999 is when the majority of MTV News' information was appearing on the web before it was on air or only on the web. So that would line up, when all of a sudden, as an organization, MTV News's shows are more topically focused and really making better television, doing deep dives and explorations and exploring new ways to communicate, while the web is how we're sharing information about the music and musicians of the day. And that lines up with Napster pretty well.
Something else, Michael, like, one thing that I think is kind of interesting is also how expensive is it maintaining digital archives? Because, and we're getting into this because we're kind of also looking at what happens in just this year.
Yeah.
So how expensive is it to maintain these archives? Like some people might think like, oh, it just lives on there and it's nothing, but what what insight do you have?
Yeah. So I'm not expert on this. I know a lot about it. It depends if we're talking about web pages or if we're talking about video, or sound. Video, and just has to do with how much machinery, how much storage does it take to keep something? Maintaining a text website's digital archives, the MTV News uh, web reported archive is not, exorbitantly expensive. Video is another matter entirely. Um, it is, I mean, yeah, that's another matter entirely. Which is why nobody has got all of their video available. I do not know what Google spends, maintaining YouTube. It's got to be astronomical. They have astronomical sums of money. When we talk about the cost of archives and what you want to keep and what's on demand, I think the other cost that has to be of concern is that those archives should still be working, right? The history, and I've spoken about this elsewhere, at MTV News, our digital artist archive is of as much interest, or was of as much interest to our audience as the new news. Because if you're a music fan, you wanted to do a deep dive into any artist you loved and you read everything. So old news about artists, music, and this is probably actors, is still earning money, can still be serving up ads, however you monetize your traffic digitally. That stuff is still working. And so, the first thing that occurs to me is an archive helps pay for itself. It's, particularly if it's web stuff as opposed to video. I can't speak to the cost of video. It's just not my area of expertise.
But so in July of this year, Paramount pulled the MTV News
Yeah, yeah,
archive, and you actually wrote a really, which is how I discovered you, was through this op-ed you had written
sure.
about
Yeah,
Variety about the archive and why it was so important. Like, could you? One thing that you had mentioned, if I can find this right now, because of course it was you had this
it's at
quote
the end.
in uh
I know what you're going to say.
history, yeah, and you
History
wrote
needs
these
stewards.
stewards and not owners.
Yeah.
Um, could you explain a little bit about what you mean by that?
Yeah. So, well, first of all, history is a value. History needs to be known. People care about history. History is how we know where we've been, where we're going. It matters. And whether it's music history and you want to understand the evolution of an art form or of an artist or any other history, the ability to access this is important. When news was most best or most deeply contained in newspapers and magazines, print media, large libraries would, anywhere in the country, if it was big enough, would have a collection that a person who was interested in history could go and explore. Um, when archives become digital, okay, the two things happen. One, they're much more easy to explore. They're more valuable. They're more usable. This is exciting. This is the archive's importance and value has just increased because more people can get more out of it faster. That's great. That's value. But if that archive can be deleted, removed, taken away, not only is history no longer available, uh, well, history is no longer available. Two, the people who created that history no longer have access to their work. Um, some people think, okay, that's crazy. If you were a writer or an author, you need to be keeping copies of everything. As a practical matter, that's not how journalism takes place right now. So the idea that private companies are taking substantial collections of history, and making them available, deleting them, making them available, taking them away is really jerking around the public's and everyone's ability to know what's happened, to be able to study history, to be able to look at this. It's a real harm to people who care about how things came to be, what the truth is, and where things are likely going.
Is there, I mean, I feel like you're kind of already answered this, but I'm going to ask the question anyway. What you would advice you would give to, again, young journalists, working journalists right now, et cetera, to sort of guard yourself against the possibility of, your shop shutting down and somebody pulling the plug on whatever sort of digital warehouse or whatever was keeping all of your work?
Yeah. Well, item one is you have to keep copies you have to keep copies of everything you've done. You have to. That was not new in pre-digital days. If you were a television producer, you kept reels, and if you were a print writer, you kept a clip file. And most print, you'll have those things. But digital, there it is, and it's so beautiful because you can search it and you can find it, and it's been taken for granted. And I know at MTV people who are talking about thousands of pieces of work that they have no access to, and how maddening that is. So keeping copies of your work and also keeping them in an organized manner. And these are digital days. There's no reason you can't have some sort of a database, or Excel file to track all of this stuff. But I want to talk some more about the history needs stewards. This is a big thing. Um, I mentioned in the piece that I did for Variety, a program that we had on MTVnews.com called Mixtape Mondays. This is a history of young up and coming artists, many of whom were unsigned, hip hop artists, making music, getting signed, and developing. No one else had done anything like this. This is a unique history. It is unavailable right now. It's off the web. Shaheem Reed and Ramon Dukes, the two very talented people who created it, have copies of some of that stuff. But this history is right now somewhere, presumably in a vault, in a machine controlled by Skydance or whoever is controlling Paramount's assets right now. The public needs that information, or culture needs that information. History wants, or is best served by it being available to people. And I think approaching this stuff as if it is purely property, and I don't begrudge whoever owns the thing that they own it. That's, if you bought it, it's yours. But what you do with it is, there needs to be like an ethics of history, and an ethic, but that addresses the responsible ownership or stewardship of recorded history. Okay, it's yours. If you need to charge, you got to charge some. That's fine, not a lot, free for students. But it's not your history. You own, the copies of it. Please do so responsibly. Do things like this need to be? Do you give it to the Library of Congress? Do you give it to your state? How do you move that stuff forward? It needs to be out. It needs to be available. It's not. History can't be privately withheld, in my opinion, ethically. That just seems wrong. It's anti-intelligence. It's anti-evolution. It's anti-knowledge.
Now, I'm aware actually that so the Internet Archive reached out to you
Yeah,
after they saw your piece, and they had been, I guess, throughout the decades, been they actually have been saving some of those. And I noticed that they actually started something where you see, I believe they said that they have like 460,000,
sure,
over 460,000 snapshots. So that's something. But how did it all happen? How did they reach out to you? And what
sure.
was,
Well, so if anyone isn't familiar with the Wayback Machine, it's this
Mhm.
website that crawls websites and periodically records copies of what was there. And you can look up, at anyone.com and see if they've got anything. And they've been doing this for a while. Uh, these are people who care about archives and who care about history. Uh, and I mean, long known that MTV News had stuff there. It's not complete; they don't have everything, but they have been crawling MTV's site for a long time and collecting stuff. Um, Shortly after I wrote that piece, I heard from Mark Graham, who's one of the leaders, if not the leader, at the Wayback Machine, saying, "Hey, we got a lot of your stuff." And then they did a little work to create a searchable index for it. And yeah, 400,000 pages of our stuff are now findable. It's not the fastest thing, it's not the most elegant thing, but it exists. I'll also tell you, it's not all there, you know,
Mhm.
and there are things that are missing. And I'm confident that some stuff has been permanently deleted by the people
Oh
who,
man.
yeah. Uh, and there's different reasons for that. A few years ago, I was alerted to the fact that longer form features that we had done, that were a little more, in terms of web design, complex, were really taxing to adapt to a new database, adapt to new storage. And so a decision was made to delete them. Uh, that's bad news for everything that was contained in those things. That is not true, it's my understanding, for the daily news coverage, which is the biggest repository of history. But some of that stuff I'm pretty sure is gone. Um, so back to the Wayback Machine, they grabbed a whole lot of stuff, and they do this with other websites as well. They collect, they archive, um, and I've been having a back and forth with them and a conversation with them, and I don't know what's going to happen to the original MTV archives, but right now, the Wayback Machine is a place for people to, and it takes some work to use, but the stuff is there, or much of the material is there. This isn't how history should be saved. You know,
Mhm.
bunch of
And
guys who love archives build this amazing website, crawl stuff, and they got things. It's a little haphazard when the original archive database exists. It exists, right? That is, and it functions. What are the costs of maintaining it? Well, figure that out. You know,
exactly.
figure it out, sell it to Amazon, come up with a fee structure, come up with a usage structure. It's history is of value, um, and needs to be taken care of. And if the owners can't take care of it, put it up for sale, which I'm not entirely convinced, sure isn't happening. Maybe um,
But
does Amazon buy it? Does Spotify buy it? For us, does someone deeply interested in music history buy it? Uh, but but across the board, all of history can't be sold to the highest bidder. I mean, it can.
Which I completely
Making it
agree. I mean,
available.
yeah, like this is reminding, I mean, okay, some people might say this isn't as critical as, the early, RCA recordings that are at the Smithsonian or something, but as time goes on, yes, some of the stuff that MTV News covered, yes, that's cultural news, like the
Sure.
growth of hip hop and all. Anyway, I just don't
it-
understand why people aren't taking this more seriously.
Yeah. So I want to take back what I just said. Do sell history to the highest bidder, and then that bidder needs to be, it needs to curate it and needs to be a steward for it. Whoever cares about it the most, own it, and then make it available. Make it available. Do what you want with it. I mean, as long as you're not destroying the information or tainting the information. And by tainting, I mean like warping the facts. If you're using it for marketing, go ahead, you own it. But the history itself is important above and beyond the business of possessing media.
and I do think it's important that, you know, you mentioned earlier about keeping it free for students, because I think it's important that young people have access to that freely, because I think that there is an importance in them learning from the past, and they might not have the money and the access that adults who are working adults have access to that same material. So I think there is an importance in that. One thing I also wanted to mention is we are going to include in our, when we post this episode, we'll include a link to the Internet Archive way back, so that
Sure.
people can have access to whatever is there from the MTV archives. Um, One thing I did want to get from the also, Michael, was so MTV News folded last year. The
Yeah.
division went out of. How did you feel about that?
Well, so something called MTV. There
Okay.
was an MTV News that was started in 1984 by a guy named Doug Herzog, the original news director. And that organization is the organization that started the Week in Rock and was continuous in terms of leadership until about 2014, when the senior management at MTV just sort of dumped the senior leadership or replaced the senior leadership. I take back dumped. The Dave Cerolnik, who is my boss, I hold in the highest regard. But they were that top down was removed. And then there were some new iterations. They decided we had some long form, deep dive journalists who came in for another several years. I don't myself think of that as the MTV News that I was a part of or that we mostly speak of. Am I prejudiced? I just, I don't know that it had the presence, that
Mhm.
it had the impact, that it was known. That, I remember watching MSNBC one day, Chris Hayes' show. He had someone on from MTV News, and the first thing Chris Hayes said was, "Is that still a thing?" And I had the same reaction. From 1984 until 2014, there's a continuum of the one department and of leadership, and I think of philosophy. Uh, I think at a certain point it lost its way, or it just no longer fit. I wasn't there. I wasn't frankly paying a lot of attention in the last few years. I personally moved on, but it's gone. And the last several years, I don't think of that when I think of MTV News. Maybe that's a mistake on my part. I just don't know about it.
So we are coming up on the end of our time together, which has been
Okay.
absolutely fabulous and eye-opening and all sorts of stuff. But um one of the things we always ask all of our guests at the end is, how did you become a journalist? What was your journey to get to the position that you held with MTV News? So can you share that story with us?
Sure. I was studying television and film production at New York University. I'm a graduate of NYU's film program. Uh, and when it came time to have an internship, there were the available internships that were peach, really the best. One was on a soap opera. The other was in the local news investigative reporting unit. To me, a soap opera wasn't appealing. I was from a family of news hounds, and while I had never considered journalism, I was a great consumer of television news. 60 Minutes was the biggest show on television at the time. We watched it religiously. I was from a CBS family, so I already knew the place. So I decided to take the internship just to go in and play. Uh, and I became a research assistant in an investigative reporting unit. So I go from no journalism background to CBS News at its peak. This is 1980, uh, doing really serious work with really serious people. Arnold Diaz is the well-known investigative reporter. I'm in his unit at that time, and I was good at it. I had no idea what was going to happen, but I'm working. I'm looking around. I'm seeing the legends from my life. My first minute at CBS, I'm in an elevator with Walter Cronkite. My first week, I'm in the 60 Minutes offices with the Mike Wallaces of the world. There are all these heavyweights that I've grown up watching and appreciating, and now I'm working with them. And the person I worked for, the producer, Ann Sorkowitz, was telling me I was good at it. They offered me a summer job, which I took. I had pitched an idea. The idea I pitched ended up winning an Emmy Award. I'm still in school. And I'm good at this. And in these days, how do you break into the television industry was a big question. If you're not connected, if you don't know somebody, if your family's, I am from none of that. I had no resources. I had no connections, but I was good at it, and I had a great time. And this turned into a job in Baltimore, Maryland, the ABC affiliate, where I worked with Erin Moriarty, who's still in the world getting people out of jail, where I worked with an up and coming co-host of the new news named Oprah Winfrey. You may have heard of her. I was working with Oprah in
Familiar,
1983.
familiar.
And then after 2 years, the people I interned for brought me back to the investigative reporting unit at CBS. After 5 years, I decided I wanted to make television more than I wanted to be an investigator. So I decided to leave news and do other things. And that was fine until someone said, "You want to make rock and roll news?" But I came to news through an opportunity. It was just an opportunity to intern. I found myself on the top of Mount Olympus, and they told me I was doing a good job and I was having a good time. I was the right person in the right place at the right time, and highly supported by the people I interned for, given opportunities. The opportunities turned out. Again, the Emmy thing when I'm a junior in college, that was, I wrote up a proposal as a thank you for my internship. I said, "You guys should do this someday." They said, "No, we're hiring you to do it." This was, making your own luck. I didn't even know I was making my own luck. It just happened.
Wow.
And yeah, so that's really it. Yeah, CBS News was Mount Olympus. I was there. I appreciated it, and I was doing it. And then you don't walk away from that. You don't walk away from that much. And this is in the media elite. There's only 3 television channels. You don't walk away from being in a place like that when they're saying, "Come work for us."
And you love doing
Definitely.
it too, right? I mean, that's the
Oh
thing
yeah,
too.
yeah. It was in the end. I got out because if when you're doing investigative journalism, it could be 3 weeks of research for 3 days of television. My original love was working with cameras, editing, making TV, and then I found myself at an enormously important place that did that. But I wanted to spend more time making television than being an investigative journalist. So when I ended up at MTV News, it wasn't 3 weeks of research to do a piece. It was 2 days of research, 2 days of shooting, a day of writing, a day of editing on it. That was a beautiful mix. Even if it wasn't about music, that the proportions of journalism versus production were what I wanted personally in my life. Um, but going back to the love of music, I loved CBS News. I loved those reporters and the work they did. I grew up watching them. They
Hmm.
mattered to me and my family. So there was a passion component there, even though it was hard news. I worked on stories about nuclear reactors and groundwater pollution in Long Island, dangers in subway tunnels. This was not rock and roll, but it was important and it was satisfying to do. And then, of course, people saw your work. So it felt like it mattered. And that was something to know you were making a difference or helping someone else make a difference. I was support to people who are doing great television.
All right, Michael, this has been such a fabulous conversation, and we could keep going, but we do have to wrap. But I want to thank you so much for taking time to join us on Laid Off and Looking. This has just been, it's been eye-opening and informative and fun,
Good.
which feels like the thing that is getting lost in all of this. It's been so much fun.
Yeah, if you don't love what you're doing, you know, you better be making like a mountain of money. And even then, you got to love what you're doing. And I did. I was fortunate.
Yeah, it
Thank
makes
you,
the
Michael.
tedious part worth it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We are re-recording because there are some important points that we did miss
Yeah.
out on, and one of them are, what are the journalistic ethics of MTV News?
Well, just so one of the concerns that people had about MTV working there, you'd hear from the outside is you're in bed with the record companies. Now, was MTV in bed with the record companies? Of course. They were serving the music in the music videos. We were playing them. That was an important relationship. Was MTV News in bed with the record companies? Not at all. I remember a story. The band Destiny's Child had played a show, and this is Beyonce before
I was
she
going to be like,
started.
with the little
Mm-hmm.
known
Well,
singer,
yeah.
Beyonce.
It may have been in Philadelphia. I forget where, but something went wrong at the concert. And it's like they had a major malfunction of some kind. We reported it. Beyonce's father, Mr. Knowles, I'm forgetting his first name, really wanted that story off of the MTV News website. I mean, it was really stuck in his craw. And he reached out to the powers that be and the people who wanted the videos from Destiny's Child and said, "Can you take that down? Could you please take that down?" I received a phone call from a higher up saying, "How would we feel about that?" I said, "Well, we're not doing it." Now, I'm saying this to someone who absolutely at any time can fire me. And I had maybe 3 of these conversations in 18 years where they very much wanted me personally to eliminate a piece of content if it wouldn't be too bad. All 3 times I said it would be too bad. but besides, we had audience feedback we'd already heard on the site. We'd already published comments from folks who'd been there. We were there. It's true. It's good. It's good for Destiny's Child that people know this happened. So that didn't happen. This happened a few, maybe 3 times. Please take that down. Getting pressure, getting heavy pressure. I'm hearing from people quite high up, but they never said just get it down. They said it'd really be great if you could. And I said I couldn't. Then I'd let my boss know, Dave Cerulnik, what had happened, and we all were fine. We said no. I did have a saying in those days: you got to be willing to be fired to do your job. But it never really came up. We just got pressed every once in a while. And I don't, me personally, and also just the few times I saw anyone else getting pressed in the department, I don't think we ever gave anything up ever. We just pushed back. And again, the people who ran the company, who ran MTV, and I'm thinking Judy McGrath, I'm thinking Van Toffler, Tom Freston above Judy. They, in the end, they were of the spirit. And MTV didn't just happen. The people who created MTV were meant to create MTV. And in the end, they got the values even while they were doing their corporate jobs. So no, we never, ever, ever buckled, under pressure like that from people who had a lot of leverage with us. And I'm proud of that to this day, which is why I mentioned it after we closed.
Yeah, no, that's fine. It's totally fine.
Yeah.
And I think that is also super important because one of the criticisms of soft news around, like music or even Hollywood or something is that I don't want to say the press flags, but like the PR people can kind of control the narrative or they can, etc.
I have a fun story. I think it was a Radiohead concert. We'd hired a freelance producer to cover a band on tour. May have been Radiohead, may have not been. And he filed this great concert report and we ran it. Published about 10 o'clock at night, California time. Wake up the next morning, we had a comment section called You Tell Us. And that email came directly to me. It was not read by an intern, it was read by the vice president of news because I wanted to see. It was a beautiful thing to do. You wake up early in the morning, what's the audience saying? The audience is saying, we're full of shit. We weren't at the show. Because what we said had happened for the encore, we weren't there. We're posers, we're phonies, we're fakes. What happened? I call the editor who hired the writer. The editor contacts the writer. The writer had to leave 3 songs early. He leaves, calls someone who had seen them early in the tour, gets the details on how the show ended, and he writes it up assuming that's what they did, but it didn't happen. So aside from that guy never got paid, we took the story down. We published a news story. The headline was something like, about that screwed up Radiohead report you read here. And I just wrote a piece telling the audience what had happened, apologizing, and promising we'd have a new reporter there. We would do expanded coverage of the band, and we would get it right. We're very sorry. The amount of positive feedback we got from that, because there we were. We ran our own story about how we got fooled and made a headline of it, and just said, "Hey, we got worked, and we put that out to you, and we apologize. It's on us. We're going to make it up. We're going to do a better job," and that's what happened.
That maintained the trust though, because you were being transparent about the situation, and you were also being accountable about what happened there too. That really solidifies the trust with your audience, right?
Yeah. And if you're a music fan, first of all, imagine you're a 16-year-old music fan. Your music, it's everything. We used to tell new hires, if you don't know how to spell Anthony Kiedis' name correctly, you obviously know nothing about the Red Hot Chili Peppers. The hardcore fan has no tolerance for getting anything wrong. These standards were very high for getting information right. You had to know what you were talking about. And our mid-level of editors checking that stuff, it was crucial that we knew what we were talking about. So a gross error like that, no, we have to jump in like the music fans we are and say, hey, we got you. We didn't yesterday, but we're going to fix that. I love doing that. That was a great day. But I mean, yeah, that only happened to us once where we ran something that was factually inaccurate that the audience knew was inaccurate. Yeah. So anyway, I always enjoyed that. And the
Yeah,
audience
but I think that's an
responded importantly.
excellent
Yeah,
story and illustration
yeah,
of, as Don was saying, those incredibly important tenets of accountability, transparency, accuracy, trustworthiness. All of those things are
yeah.
essential if you're going to be any news organization.
And for a young audience who is new to this, they're being turned on to something. Just going back to CBS News, if you remember when 60 Minutes, Dan Rather did a report, people ended up getting fired from 60 Minutes, including the executive producer Josh Howard. When I was working for Arnold Diaz, I worked with Josh Howard for a couple of years, and I remember when all the noise was going on in the New York about the story, how he had been quoted as saying he wanted to pull the entire broadcast off the air and do a full mea culpa apology on air. And people are arguing about what's the truth. And I remember I told my wife, I said, this is exactly what Josh would have said. It's exactly who Josh was. We're not going to issue an apology. We're going to strip the whole thing down, take it all back. Because there were people, and I learned this there. This is at me at CBS News. There, if you got it wrong, you don't try to mince words, you don't try to explain. The first thing you do is retract, and the second thing you do is apologize, and then you go to work to get it right a new time. And I had forgotten that until I just told you the story now. Josh Howard, executive producer, CBS News. When I worked for him with Arnold Diaz's office, that's probably where I learned that you take the hard route when you get something wrong. So anyone watching this, that's how you do it.
Yeah, it's an important lesson for future journalists, people who are studying, people online, being independent journalists, and really knowing that there is a system in place and how important that all is.
So that's what I had on MTV News and news ethics. I would hold our standards up against anyone's, and always we didn't weasel out. How unrock and roll is trying to like find a thread to excuse yourself. No, you don't do that. I screwed up. Sorry. Much better.
There you go. Very simple
Yeah.
words that seem hard sometimes. It can be hard to say, it can be hard to take that acknowledgement,
Yeah.
but sometimes other people can just be unwilling.
Yeah. If you're not up for hard, wrong business.
All right. Well, with that note, then we are going to wrap it up a second time.
Yeah.
But this seriously was such a great, and I think, again, great nuggets of information that people working in the field are coming into journalism can take with them, even though MTV News is no more. So, Michael, Alex, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
All right.
Well, thanks for listening, everybody. Actually, we're going to be taking off next week. So we will be back with new content on March 28th. So thanks so much for joining us, and look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks.
Peace out, everybody, till the 28th. Bye.
Bye.
Laid Off and Looking is an independent podcast conceived of and created by Jenna Flanagan and Dominic Camia.
Music provided by Jake Howitt. Research by Laura Rothenbucker.
You can watch and follow us on YouTube.
Or you can listen and follow us wherever you get your podcasts.
And if you have any questions or suggestions, we want to hear from you. So leave a comment.
We do check them.
Or reach out to us anytime at laidofandlookingpod@gmail.com.
New episodes every Friday.